She had just turned 17. Her last post showed her smiling, surrounded by balloons, cutting a cake, a moment that should have marked the beginning of everything. But within days, Sana Yousaf would be gone, murdered in her own home. A rising influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers, Sana was more than just a familiar face on people's screens. She was bold, confident, and quietly becoming a symbol for a new generation of young women in Pakistan. But while the world saw the glitz of social media, something far more dangerous was lurking just beneath the surface. A man she barely knew, an obsession she never mentioned, and a rejection that, according to police, ended in cold-blooded violence. What happened inside that house in Islamabad has shaken the entire country. But the horror of what came after might be even worse. Because, as her family grieved and her followers mourned, a darker conversation began to unfold, one that exposed not just a killer, but a culture that too often turns its back on women the moment they dare to be seen. Before her name was splashed across headlines, Sana Yousaf was already becoming a familiar presence on screens across Pakistan. With over 500,000 followers on Instagram and a growing TikTok audience, she wasn't just another influencer. She was something rarer, a teenage girl who was unapologetically herself. Sana's content was light, personal, and full of charm. She shared moments from her daily life, smiled through short vlogs, and posted creative videos that resonated with other young people, especially girls who saw her as someone relatable, someone fearless. And she was just getting started. In a country where women are often judged harshly for simply existing online, Sana stood out. She didn't rely on controversy or flash to build her platform. Her confidence was subtle but magnetic. You could see it in the way she looked into the camera, calm, unbothered, as if she knew exactly who she was. Her last video, posted just days before her death, showed her surrounded by pastel balloons, cutting a birthday cake. It should have been a celebration of life, a moment that fans would look back on in years to come as the beginning of something big. Instead, it became a memorial. And while the comments filled with birthday wishes, no one knew that somewhere out there, a young man, someone watching from the shadows, had been quietly building a fixation. His name was Umar Hayat, just 22 years old, from the town of Faisalabad, and according to police, a man with an obsession that quickly turned dangerous. Authorities say he had been trying to get close to Sana for some time. Multiple failed attempts to meet her, unwanted messages, offers of friendship that she never accepted. But Sana, by all accounts, never mentioned him to her family, not once. Not as a friend, not as a fan, not even as a threat. And that silence says something. Maybe she didn't think he was serious. Maybe she had no idea what he was capable of. Or maybe, like so many women do, she brushed it off, hoping it would just go away. But it didn't. Police believe that rejection fueled something violent inside Hayat. Not heartbreak, but entitlement. A toxic need for control, disguised as affection. He wasn't just watching her from afar, he was waiting. What makes this even more disturbing is that this wasn't a random act. Investigators say Hayat didn't just happen to show up at her house. He planned it. He knew where she lived. He knew she'd be home. And he came prepared to kill. It wasn't love. It wasn't heartbreak. It was possession. And when he couldn't have her, he decided no one would. It happened on a Monday, quiet, ordinary, until it wasn't. According to police, Umar Hayat broke into Sana Yousaf's home in Islamabad. He wasn't invited, he wasn't expected, and he wasn't empty-handed. Inside the house, Sana's aunt was there, a silent witness to what became a nightmare. Authorities say Hayat stormed in, pulled out a weapon, and fired 2 shots. One of them hit Sana. Her aunt was threatened to, held at gunpoint, and warned to stay silent, or else. And then, just as suddenly as he entered, he was gone. Before leaving, he stole Sana's phone, possibly to erase evidence, or maybe just to take what he thought he was owed. But whatever he hoped to gain, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Sana collapsed. Her aunt tried to get help, but by the time anyone could respond, it was already too late. She died before she even reached the hospital. A 17-year-old girl, celebrated by thousands, gunned down in her own home, not because of something she did, but because she dared to live freely, to be visible, to say no. And while the manhunt was just beginning, her family was left with an unbearable reality. Their only daughter was gone, taken by someone she barely knew. News of Sana's murder spread like wildfire. By the next morning, her name was on every screen in the country. Not just because of who she was, but because of how senseless and brutal the crime had been. A teenage girl, shot dead in her own home by a man who couldn't handle rejection. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a national shock. The pressure on police was immediate and intense. Authorities called it a brutal murder and admitted it had triggered a wave of concern across Pakistan. This wasn't just a local crime, it was personal for millions who saw themselves or their daughters in Sana. Investigators launched a full-scale manhunt. They raided multiple locations across Islamabad and Punjab. Surveillance footage from over 113 CCTV cameras was scanned frame by frame. It was obsessive, relentless, and it worked. Soon, they had a suspect in custody. Umar Hayat, the man police say pulled the trigger, was arrested. He confessed. The murder weapon was found. So was Sana's stolen phone. Case closed. Not exactly, because while law enforcement celebrated the arrest, a darker storm was already forming online. One that would take the tragedy of Sana Yousaf's murder and twist it into something even more disturbing. What came next wasn't justice, it was judgment, and it wasn't aimed at the killer. It was aimed at her. As the country mourned Sana Yousaf, a second wave of shock began to hit, not in the streets, but online. At first, her Instagram and TikTok pages became digital memorials. Thousands of comments poured in. Fans shared grief, posted tributes, and wrote heartbreaking messages like, "You deserved the world, and this wasn't supposed to happen." But beneath the surface, something uglier was growing. A disturbing number of voices, mostly men, began to twist the narrative. Instead of focusing on the killer, they started questioning her. Why was she posting online? Why was she putting herself out there? Why didn't her family stop her? Some even went as far as to suggest that her social media accounts should be deleted because they were adding to her sins. It was more than victim blaming. It was a brutal attempt to erase her entirely. Digital rights group Bolo B began monitoring the backlash. Their director, Usama Khilji, confirmed what many already feared. A toxic portion of online users, emboldened by patriarchal and religious justifications, were using Sana's death to shame her life. They didn't want justice, they wanted silence. And for many watching, it felt like a second death. This time, of her voice, her presence, and everything she stood for. But not everyone stayed quiet. Amid the noise, some voices began to rise above the hate, and they refused to let Sana's story be twisted. Dr. Farzana Bari, a well-known human rights activist, called the online reaction exactly what it was: misogynistic and patriarchal. She didn't hold back. In interviews and posts, she defended Sana's right to live, to create, to exist online without fear. And she reminded the public that what happened wasn't about social media, it was about power, control, and a society that too often excuses violence against women. Others joined in. Journalists, activists, and even ordinary users began pushing back against the blame. They pointed out how absurd it was to criticize a murdered teenager instead of the man who killed her. They demanded more from the system, not just in courts, but in the culture. Even Islamabad's Inspector General of Police, Said Ali Nazar Rizvi, spoke out. He made it clear that women like Sana, women who choose to be visible, deserve support, not shame. His public statement calling the murder tragic wasn't just a formality, it was a signal, a line drawn. For a country where silence has to often been the norm, this shift mattered. But while some fought to preserve her memory, others still tried to bury it beneath moral judgment and fear. And so the question remained: would Sana Yousaf be remembered as a victim, or as a symbol of resistance? Sana Yousaf's story doesn't end with an arrest, or even a funeral. Because what happened to her is part of something much larger. Something that's been simmering for years in Pakistan and across the world. The rise of social media gave young women a platform, a chance to speak, to create, to be seen on their own terms. But with that visibility came a backlash. Not just from strangers, but from a culture still struggling to accept women who refuse to stay silent. Sana wasn't provocative. She wasn't political. She posted birthday videos and vlogs, and yet, even that was enough to make her a target. Her murder peeled back the surface on a deeper truth, that for many women, being online isn't just a career, it's a risk. And the danger isn't just physical, it's digital, it's emotional, it's societal. Whether it's death threats, harassment, or cruel moral judgments after the fact, the message sent to women is painfully clear. Your voice is only safe if it stays quiet. But Sana didn't stay quiet. And that's what scared people the most. Her story has sparked new conversations about safety, visibility, and who gets to exist in public spaces, both online and off. Some are calling for better protection for female influencers. Platforms take harassment more seriously. A few are even questioning how young girls can ever feel safe doing what Sana did, just being herself. There's no easy answer. But one thing is clear, what happened to Sana wasn't just one man's crime. It was a reflection of everything we've allowed to go unchecked for too long. Sana Yousaf was just 17. She didn't spark controversy. She didn't ask for attention. All she did was share her life, like millions of other girls do every day. But in the end, it was that simple act of visibility that cost her everything. Her story is heartbreaking, yes, but it's also infuriating, because it forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Why is a woman's presence online still treated like a provocation? Why do so many respond to rejection with rage? And why, even after her death, was Sana blamed more than the man who took her life? There are no neat answers here, no perfect resolution, but what's left, what must be left, is the truth that Sana mattered. Her voice mattered, and so does the way we choose to remember her. Not just as a victim of violence, but as a symbol of everything that still needs to change. Because if we let this story fade like just another headline, then we're part of the silence that allowed it to happen. And that, more than anything, would be the real tragedy. In the days after Sana Yousaf's death, something unexpected happened. Her TikTok following, which had already been sizable, exploded. From 500,000 to over 1 million overnight. Not because she posted again, not because of some viral trend, but because people wanted to see her, hear her voice, understand who she was before the headlines rewrote her story. Her final video, it was simple. She was surrounded by balloons, smiling, cutting a cake for her birthday. No filters, no controversy, just a teenage girl celebrating life. That video now plays like a ghost, a frozen moment of joy before everything shattered. But in a strange way, it's also become a symbol. Not of what was lost, but of what she stood for. The right to exist, to be seen, to take up space unapologetically. Today, Sana's name still lingers in hashtags, in debates, in quiet conversations between young girls and their mothers. Her story has started something uncomfortable, maybe, but necessary. A reckoning. A reminder that the fight for women's safety isn't theoretical. It's not future tense. It's now. And while she didn't live long enough to see the impact she'd have, her legacy is still unfolding. In louder conversations, in bolder creators, in people refusing to look away. Because after everything, after the fear, the silence, the tragedy, Sana Yousaf is still being heard.